Pay my mother first, then I'll tell you where your son is. The little black girl said it without raising her voice. Her shoes were wet from the rain, her coat sleeves too short for her wrists, and both hands were locked around a burned manila envelope as if someone might kill the truth if she let go. Charles Whitmore stared at her from across his penthouse table. Behind him, his lawyer stopped breathing. 3 hours earlier, the city below Manhattan had looked clean from the 72nd floor, all silver rain and glass towers, the kind of view that made poverty seem too far away to be real. Charles Whitmore stood beside a black marble table in a charcoal suit, a fountain pen resting between his fingers, while the final pages of the Whitmore Family Trust lay open beneath the soft glow of a brass desk lamp. There was a glass of ice water near his left hand, untouched long enough that a ring of condensation had formed around it. Across the room, 2 security guards waited by the elevator. Near the windows, Victor Langley, Charles's private attorney for almost 20 years, adjusted his cuff links and watched the signature line with the patience of a man who had rehearsed this moment for years. Once you sign, the inactive inheritance provisions are closed permanently, Victor said. No more predatory claims. No more ghosts. Charles did not answer. The word ghost stayed in the room. 13 years had passed since his son Ethan disappeared after a private school trip outside Boston. 13 years of search teams, ransom calls, false sightings, psychics, reporters, and strangers who arrived with stories in exchange for money. Charles had paid some, exposed others, buried most of it behind lawyers until grief became paperwork. He lowered the pen. That was when the elevator doors opened. Not with the smooth permission of a scheduled guest, but with a soft mechanical chime that made both guards turn too late. A small girl stepped out, 10 years old, maybe, dark brown skin, thin face, braids tucked under the hood of a faded brown coat. In her arms she held an old manila envelope, its top corner blackened as if it had once been too close to fire. One guard reached for her shoulder, but she pulled away just enough to keep her dignity. I'm not here to steal, she said. Victor's eyes narrowed. How did she get up here? Charles looked at the girl, then at his guards. Who are you? She walked forward only 3 steps and stopped at the edge of the marble table. Small against the glass walls, the city lights, the money. Maya Brooks, she said. My mother's name is Denise. Victor's expression changed so quickly Charles almost missed it. A blink, a tightening at the mouth, then nothing. Charles heard it anyway, the silence where recognition should not have been. You need to leave, Victor said. Maya did not look at him. She looked at the pen in Charles's hand. Pay my mother first, she said. Then I'll tell you where your son is. The room went still. Charles's jaw hardened. My son is dead. Maya's fingers tightened on the envelope. No, sir, she said. His name was Ethan, but the woman who saved him called him Eli. Charles felt the first small break in his anger. Not belief, not hope, only the sharp discomfort of a detail landing too close to bone. Victor stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, do not engage. This is extortion. Maya placed the envelope on the table, but kept 2 fingers on one corner. A sliver of a photograph slid into view. A red toy car, one wheel missing, resting beside a child's bandaged hand. Charles did not reach for it. He could not, because before Ethan vanished, he had slept with that same red car under his pillow. The red toy car in the photograph did not prove anything by itself. Charles knew that. He had built a life by distrusting what desperate people placed in front of him. A photograph could be copied. A story could be taught. A child could be sent into a room because adults knew a billionaire would hesitate before calling her a liar to her face. So he made his voice cold again. How much? Maya did not blink. Victor moved closer, almost gently, as if the whole room needed him to be reasonable. Mr. Whitmore, this is exactly how these scams work. They offer one private detail, then they ask for money before producing anything verifiable. Charles kept his eyes on the girl. How much does your mother want? Maya reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper, softened at the creases, the kind of paper carried too long by someone afraid to lose it. She laid it beside the envelope. Written in careful pencil was one number, $18,740. No dollar sign, no extra zeros, no greedy round figure, just the amount, exact and plain. Charles looked at it, and some part of him hated that the number felt wrong in the opposite direction. Too small for blackmail. Too specific for begging. Victor gave a quiet laugh. Convenient. Maya finally looked at him. That is not hush money, she said. That is what you promised my mother before you made her disappear from every payroll. The rain tapped against the windows, soft and steady. Somewhere behind the bar, a melting ice cube shifted in Charles's glass with a tiny crack. Victor's face stayed composed, but his hand closed around the leather folder at his side. Your mother was never employed by any Whitmore entity. I didn't say Whitmore, Maya answered. I said St. Agnes. Charles saw it again, that nearly invisible pause in Victor's breathing. St. Agnes was not a name the public knew. It had been a private recovery clinic in Queens, shut down years earlier after licensing problems and a quiet property sale. Charles remembered signing something about it once, or being told not to worry about it. A clinic that closed a decade ago, Victor said, smooth as glass. Anyone could search old records. Maya shook her head. Not the night records. Charles turned slightly. What night? Victor spoke before she could. Charles, don't. It was the first time all evening he had used Charles's first name instead of Mr. Whitmore. Not loud, not dramatic, but too fast, too familiar. Charles noticed. Maya unfolded the paper another inch. Beneath the amount was a second line, smaller. Clinic relocation expense, April 14th. Charles felt the words touch some buried administrative memory. He looked toward Victor. Was there a relocation expense? Victor's smile held, but barely. There were thousands of expenses that year. That wasn't my question. Maya slid the paper back before anyone could take it. My mother said rich people only believe paper, she whispered. So I brought paper. Victor's phone vibrated once inside his jacket. He did not reach for it. Charles heard it anyway. A small, ordinary sound. A normal sound. But Victor's eyes moved to Maya's envelope for half a second too long. Charles lowered the pen and asked softly, Who gave you the service elevator code? Maya looked at the guards, then back at him. The same person who told me your cameras go dark for 6 minutes every Friday at 9. Charles did not look at the guards when Maya said the cameras went dark. He looked at Victor. Only for a second. Only long enough for the room to understand that something had shifted without anyone being allowed to name it. Victor adjusted his tie. A calm little movement that belonged in boardrooms, courtrooms, funerals, anywhere a man needed his hands to look innocent. That is absurd, he said. A child repeating technical language she doesn't understand. Maya's eyes stayed on Charles. I understand 6 minutes, she said. My mother said 6 minutes is enough time for a lie to walk in and sign its name. One of the guards glanced toward the ceiling camera near the elevator. Charles noticed that too. He noticed everything now because grief had taught him to hate details and business had taught him to survive by them. He set the fountain pen down beside the trust documents and reached for his phone. Victor's voice lowered. Mr. Whitmore, I strongly advise against turning this into a spectacle. Charles did not answer him. He sent one message to his head of residential security, a man named Owen Park, who had never worked for Victor and had once told Charles the truth about a nephew stealing watches from a guest room, even when everyone else preferred silence. Pull lobby and service elevator footage. Tonight. Last 90 minutes. No deletions. Then Charles placed the phone face down. Maya still had 2 fingers on the envelope. Open it, Charles said. Not all of it, Maya replied. Why? Because when grown men want paper gone, they make children look careless. The sentence was too polished to be accidental but not rehearsed enough to be false. Charles heard the mother inside it. He heard a woman teaching her daughter how not to be swallowed by rooms like this. Maya slid out the Polaroid only halfway. The red toy car came first, then the bandaged hand, then a narrow strip of a hospital blanket with blue stitching. Charles stared at the little plastic car. Red body, Black wheels. One front wheel missing. He remembered buying it from a kiosk at Logan Airport because Ethan had cried when Charles took a business call instead of watching planes with him. He had handed the toy over like an apology cheap enough to fit in a child's palm. The wheel broke the night he woke up, Maya said. He kept asking if his dad could fix it. Victor gave a thin smile. Any father could own a red toy car. Maya pulled the photo another inch. Now the boy's face showed. Pale from injury, eyes half-lidded, hair darker than Charles remembered but the same stubborn line at the mouth. Above the left eyebrow sat a small scar, curved like a comma. Charles did not move. That scar was from a sailboat cleat, he said, almost to himself.
Kapekod.
He was 6. Victor turned sharply. Charles. Again the first name. Again too fast. Maya reached into the envelope and placed a second object on the table. A hospital bracelet cut clean through the plastic, yellowed with age. It did not say Ethan Whitmore. It said E17. Under that, in faded ink, was a date. April 14th. Charles's phone buzzed once against the table. He turned it over. Owen's message held only one sentence. Service elevator footage is missing from 8:54 to 9 o'clock, and the override was entered with Victor Langley's master code. Charles read Owen's message twice, and the second reading was worse than the first because the words did not change. Victor Langley's master code. Missing footage. 6 minutes gone. Rain struck the glass behind him in soft, expensive rhythms while the penthouse held its breath around a child no one wanted to believe. Victor recovered first. He did not grab the phone. He did not shout. He simply turned to the guards and said, "Please escort Miss Brooks to the east sitting room until we can contact the appropriate authorities." The words were polite enough to sound protective. That made them colder. One guard stepped toward Maya. She slid the bracelet back under her palm, then pulled the Polaroid against her chest. "I'm not going anywhere without my mother's paper," she said. Victor's smile softened as if he were speaking to a frightened student. "Sweetheart, adults are discussing very serious matters now. You've done what whoever sent you wanted you to do." Maya looked up at him. "Nobody sent me. Children don't just walk into buildings like this with sealed evidence. Men like you make sure they have to." The sentence landed so quietly that nobody moved. Charles saw the guard's hand pause an inch from Maya's shoulder. Across the room, the private elevator opened again. This time it was Marjorie Vale, chairwoman of the Whitmore Foundation, wrapped in a cream wool coat with pearls at her throat and a phone still in her hand. Behind her came Mrs. Haskell, the house manager, stiff with embarrassment, and a younger board attorney carrying a tablet. Victor must have called them before anyone realized he was afraid. Marjorie took in the scene. The wet child, the old envelope, the documents on the marble table, Charles standing too still. Her expression became carefully kind. "Charles," she said, "this needs to be handled delicately." Then she looked at Maya the way rich people sometimes looked at a spill on an antique rug. Not angry, worse, concerned about the stain. "Young lady, where is your guardian?" "Working," Maya said. "Where?" Marjorie asked. "Wherever people still pay late and call it a misunderstanding." Mrs. Haskell lowered her eyes. Victor gave a small sigh. "This is exactly what I mean. The child has been coached." The board attorney tapped his tablet. "Mr. Whitmore, from a liability standpoint, we should avoid further direct questioning. If her mother is making a claim against an estate-related entity, all communication should go through counsel." Through counsel. The phrase filled the room like a locked door. Maya's shoulders seemed smaller beneath her damp coat, but her fingers stayed firm on the envelope. Charles watched her standing under the chandelier, shoes leaving. Faint rain marks on Italian stone, surrounded by people who knew how to make dismissal sound like procedure. He had seen rooms like this swallow adults. A child should not have had to stand inside one. "Maya," he said softly, "show me the transfer paper." Victor stepped between them before she could move.
No.
"We are done passing around unverified materials." He turned to Marjorie, calm again, almost relieved. "Have security preserve the child's items. Not seize." Preserve. Then call Child Services and the NYPD non-emergency line. We'll document everything properly. It sounded reasonable. Sounded clean. It sounded like the truth being put into a drawer. Maya stared at Victor for a long second, then reached into the envelope and removed a folded photocopy, keeping it just out of his reach. My mother said you would use nice words when you got scared. Victor's face did not change, but his eyes did. And what else did your mother say? Maya placed the paper flat on the marble. Transfer authorization. St. Agnes Recovery Clinic. April 14th. At the bottom was Victor's signature. Marjorie leaned closer, then frowned. Victor, is that yours? A routine administrative signature, he said instantly. Too instantly. Thousands crossed my desk that year. Maya pointed to the top corner of the form, where a second stamp sat faint and crooked beneath the clinic letterhead. Charles followed her finger. The stamp read received 9:03 p.m. Maya looked at the phone still in Charles's hand and said, "Your camera went dark until 9. Then she turned back to Victor. But your paper says you received him 3 minutes after the lie ended." Victor did not look at the timestamp again. That was what Charles noticed first. A man who had spent 2 decades correcting commas in contracts, who could find a missing clause in a 200-page acquisition agreement before breakfast, suddenly had no interest in a crooked stamp that placed his own signature 3 minutes after missing footage. Instead, Victor turned to Marjorie with the calm disappointment of a professional forced to manage an emotional mess. "This proves nothing except that someone has assembled fragments from old files," he said. "We are giving a child's performance too much authority." Maya's hand tightened around the envelope. "It's not a performance." The board attorney cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitmore, legally speaking, possession of copied medical records by a minor raises serious concerns. The materials should be secured." "No," Maya said. Not loudly, just once. The word stopped him because it did not sound like fear. It sounded like a door locking. Charles looked at her then, really looked. The rain had darkened the shoulders of her coat. One of her braids had slipped loose near her cheek. She stood in a room where every adult had better shoes, better grammar, better reasons to ignore her, and still she kept her body between them and the paper. "What else is in the envelope?" Charles asked. Victor's head turned. "Charles." But Charles did not take his eyes off Maya. "Show me what you came to show me." Maya hesitated for the first time. Not because she did not trust the evidence, but because she did not trust the room. Then she reached inside her coat, beneath the envelope, and pulled out something wrapped in a square of faded dish towel. She unfolded it carefully on the marble table. It was a small gray microcassette recorder, scratched along the side, with a strip of masking tape across the front. Written on the tape in blue pen were 4 words. "If they deny it." Marjorie exhaled softly, almost offended by the ugliness of the thing sitting on Charles Whitmore's perfect table. Mrs. Haskell's eyes flicked toward Victor and away again. Victor gave a short, controlled smile. "A tape recorder. Of course." Maya did not press play. She placed a second item beside it. The carbon copy of a check stub, yellowed and thin, made out to D. Brooks for $18,740. On the back was a signature. Denise Brooks. Charles stared at the handwriting. At first it meant nothing to him. Then Maya slid a folded note from her pocket and opened it beside the stub. It was a rent warning from Newark, signed in the same careful hand as the number she had shown him earlier. Denise's real signature was rounded, slow, the letters leaning left. The check endorsement leaned right, sharp and rushed. Different hand. Same name. Charles did not speak for a long time. The silence stretched until the sound of Victor's phone vibrating in his jacket became painfully loud. Once, twice. He still did not answer. "My mother never cashed that," Maya said. "She said somebody got paid for being her." Victor's voice remained smooth, but something under it had hardened. "Children misunderstand adult records all the time." Maya looked at him. "Then why did you tell her to stop signing her real name?" Charles's eyes lifted. "When did he say that?" Maya touched the recorder but still did not play it. "The night he came to our kitchen." The TV was on low because I was supposed to be asleep. My mother was washing one bowl and one spoon so I could have cereal before school. He said if she loved me, she would learn how to disappear on paper. Charles turned slowly toward Victor. No anger yet. No shouting. Just the terrible stillness of a man beginning to measure the distance between loyalty and betrayal. You were in her kitchen? He asked. Victor's face stayed composed. But for the first time that night, he did not answer quickly enough. Charles did not ask the question again. He let it remain in the air, unanswered, because silence had always made guilty men choose between filling it and drowning in it. Victor chose neither. He looked down at the check stub, then at the recorder, then gave a tired smile meant for Marjorie and the board attorney more than for Charles. I visited many distressed claimants over the years, he said. That was my job, to protect you from people who tried to weaponize your grief. Charles nodded once, slowly, as if accepting the explanation. Of course. The words were calm enough that Victor relaxed by a fraction. That was all Charles needed to see. He reached for his glass of water and lifted it, not to drink, but to give his hand something ordinary to do. The ice had nearly melted. When he set it down, the spoon beside the tray chimed lightly against the rim, a small silver sound under the rain. Maya watched him. Children who have lived around frightened adults learn how to read pauses, and Charles could feel her reading. I don't want your money, she said. Victor almost laughed. You began this conversation with a payment demand. Maya did not look ashamed. Because my mother earned it. Her voice was steady, but smaller now. Not because I came to sell him. Charles heard the difference. Sell him. As if that accusation had already been thrown at her mother by someone with cleaner shoes and better paper. He turned his phone over again, thumb moving without hurry. To everyone else, it looked like another message. To Owen Park, he sent 3 lines. Pull St. Agnes payroll, April through June 13 years ago. Check Whitmore Family Trust disbursement for $18,740. Quietly. No Langley office access. Then he opened a second thread, one he had not used in months, to Judith Klein, the retired federal judge who had become the only outside counsel he still trusted after she once told him he was wrong in a courtroom full of donors. I need independent review tonight. Medical transfer, trust payment, possible forged endorsement. Absolute discretion. He placed the phone down before Victor could see the screen. Maya, he said, his voice level. Where is your mother now? Her eyes moved to Victor before returning to Charles. Not here. Is she safe? Maya's hand slid over the recorder. She told me not to answer that in front of him. The room seemed to lose another degree of warmth. Marjorie shifted uncomfortably. Charles, perhaps we should all step back. This is becoming emotionally charged. No, Charles said, still quiet. It is becoming specific. Victor's phone vibrated again. This time he took it halfway from his jacket, saw the screen, and pushed it back without answering. Charles saw the name reflected faintly in the dark window behind him.
El Merced.
He knew the name. Laura Mercer had managed compliance for the Whitmore Family Trust until she resigned 9 years ago after what Victor had called a nervous breakdown. Charles had sent flowers. Victor had handled the rest. Owen's reply arrived almost immediately. Trust ledger shows payment. Endorsed by Denise Brooks. Deposited into Langley Administrative Escrow, then transferred same day to Mercer. Consulting. Charles did not move, but something old inside him sank. Not because the proof was complete. It was not. Not because he knew where Ethan was. He did not. But because he could suddenly see the outline of a room he had never entered. A room built from signatures, delays, explanations, and carefully managed grief. Maya stood in the middle of it, holding the door open with both hands. Charles looked at Victor, the man who had stood beside him at Ethan's memorial, the man who had taken every false lead away before Charles could bleed over it. For 13 years, Charles had believed Victor had protected him from liars. Now, for the first time, he wondered if Victor had protected the lie from him. Charles let the question in his mind settle before he moved. Then he did something so ordinary that Victor almost missed its danger. He picked up the Ensign Trust document, closed the folder, and slid it away from the fountain pen. "We are going to verify one thing," he said. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Verify what?" Charles looked at Maya. "Your mother said he used nice words when he was scared." Maya nodded once. "Then we will let him use them." The room tightened. The board attorney glanced at Marjorie, who glanced at Victor, but no one spoke quickly enough to regain control. Charles turned to Mrs. Haskell. "Bring the landline from my study." "Sir." "Now." She left at once, one hand hovering near the door handle for half a second before she pushed through. The pause was tiny, but Victor saw it. So did Maya. People in this house were no longer moving only for him. Charles then looked at Owen Park, who had entered quietly and taken position near the elevator without announcing himself. "Set the room camera to local backup. No clothes. No legal office access." Owen nodded. A small red light blinked once near the ceiling. Victor's mouth tightened. "Charles, this is theatrical." "No," Charles said. "This is quiet." Mrs. Haskell returned with the black desk phone from the study, its cord wrapped around the base. Charles placed it on the marble table beside the cassette recorder, the check stub, the bracelet, and the photograph. The objects looked poor and ugly against the polished stone, and somehow stronger because of it. Maya watched them as if they were people she had promised not to abandon. Charles dialed from memory. Victor's phone vibrated in his jacket at the same moment, but no one looked at it except Maya. One ring. Two. Then Charles ended the call. "Laura Mercer's old number," he said. Victor exhaled, almost amused. "That woman has not been stable in years." Maya looked down at the recorder. "That's what you called my mother too." Victor's smile thinned. Charles asked lightly, "When did Laura Mercer leave the trust office?" "After Ethan's memorial period," Victor said. 9 years ago. Maybe 10. "Why?" "Stress. Grief-adjacent work." "You remember?" "No," Charles said. "I remember you telling me not to call her." The file Owen had requested began loading on Charles's phone. A small gray circle turned on the screen. No one spoke while it spun. Rain moved down the windows in silver lines. The glass of water sat untouched, the ice finally gone. Maya leaned toward Charles just enough to whisper, "Ask him what color the kitchen was." Charles did not understand, but he trusted the shape of her certainty. He looked at Victor. "When you went to Denise Brooks's kitchen, what color were the walls?" Victor laughed once, softly. "This is ridiculous." "Answer it." "I was in hundreds of apartments." "You said you visited many claimants. If she was just one of them, say you don't remember." Victor's hand stopped near his jacket pocket. His phone vibrated again under his fingers. He did not take it out. "Yellow," he said at last. Maya closed her eyes for 1 second. Not relief. Pain. "Our kitchen was blue," she whispered. "But St. Agnes had yellow walls." Charles turned slowly toward Victor. The loading circle stopped. Owen's file opened to a scanned visitor log from St. Agnes Recovery Clinic. April 14th, 9:06 p.m. Victor Langley. Laura Mercer. Patient E17 transfer authorization. Maya slid the Polaroid closer to Charles, not to prove anything new, but to remind him what the paper had cost. Victor looked from the phone to the girl to Charles, and for the first time that night, he understood the room had changed. Maya was no longer standing in front of power alone. The scanned visitor log stayed open on Charles's phone, small and bright in the middle of the marble table. Victor stared at it as if the screen had insulted him, then recovered enough to smooth his jacket with both hands. "A visitor log proves a visit," he said. "It does not prove a conspiracy, and it certainly does not prove that this boy is alive." Charles looked at Maya. "Is there more?" Maya did not answer right away. She turned toward the elevator, then toward Owen Park, as if checking whether the room could hold what came next. For the first time, she looked like a 10-year-old girl carrying something too heavy for her size. Then she reached into the lining of her coat and pulled out a small plastic bag sealed with tape. Inside was an old phone, the kind with a scratched black screen and a cracked corner, wrapped in a paper napkin. My mother said not to turn it on unless he said St. Agnes wasn't enough, Maya whispered. Victor's face lost a little color. Not much, just enough. That device could contain anything, he said. Charles held out his hand, but Maya did not give it to him yet. If I give it to you, she said, you don't let him touch it. Charles nodded once. He won't. She placed the phone in his palm. Felt impossibly light. Cheap plastic. Old battery. A dead thing, except Maya also handed him a charger with tape around the cord. Owen plugged it into a side outlet near the bar. For several seconds, nothing happened. Rain slid down the glass. Marjorie clasped her hands so tightly her pearls trembled against her collarbone. Victor watched the phone like a man watching a locked door he had once forgotten to burn. Then the screen flickered. The faded logo appeared. Maya exhaled, and it sounded almost like pain. The phone opened without a password. There was only one video in the gallery. Charles tapped it. The image was shaky at first, dark, angled from somewhere low, maybe a purse or a kitchen shelf. Then the yellow walls of St. Agnes came into view. A younger Victor stood beside a hospital bed, his suit jacket off, sleeves rolled with careful neatness. Beside him was Laura Mercer holding a folder, and on the bed, thinner, bruised, breathing through a clear tube, was Ethan Whitmore. Alive. Charles stopped breathing. The camera shook as Denise's younger voice whispered from behind it. You said his father knows. Victor's voice answered, calm and close. His father knows what I put in front of him. Laura said, the trust transfers only if Ethan is legally presumed dead. Victor looked down at the boy in the bed. Then he will have no name until that becomes true. No one in the penthouse moved. The video continued, cruel in its quietness. Ethan stirred, barely awake, and whispered one word. Dad. Charles's face went white. The phone slipped lower in his hand, but he did not drop it. His mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out. He stared at the screen as if 13 years had turned into a hallway and he was seeing the door he had never opened. Maya stood beside the table, eyes wet but chin lifted. My mother didn't steal him, she said softly. She recorded him because nobody believed poor women without proof. Charles looked at her then, and the pain in his face changed shape. It was not only grief anymore. It was shame. He had spent years surrounded by lawyers, guards, board members, polished rooms, and sealed files, while a woman in a yellow-walled clinic had held the truth with shaking hands and been punished for it. He had mistaken silence for loyalty. He had mistaken paperwork for mercy. Victor finally reached toward the phone. Owen stepped between them before Charles even spoke. Charles set the old phone down on the marble table with almost unbearable care. Then he looked at Victor, not raising his voice at all. Call Judith Klein, he said to Owen, and lock every door.